Good day, everybody. Today we're talking a little bit about unions, the fall of unions, and we're going to make an interesting comparison between the fall of unions and the fall of industries, because what you'll see is they're very comparable, and it's a good lesson to learn, not only for unions but other industries as well. What you'll see is what happened to unions is really what's happened to other industries as well. Each can learn from each other. So, some people may think they have little in common between business and unions. Actually, they have quite a bit in common, not just because they all work for the same organization, but the life cycle of a union can be very similar to the life cycle of an industry. So in the 20th century, what we've seen is in the beginning of the 20th century, unions were created. In the middle of the 20th century, they really dominated the American industry. And then in the later part of the 20th century, they were really decimated. They declined to where they are today. Only 7%, 6 to 7% of private sector workers work for a union, about 40% of public sector. There's reasons for that, which we'll talk about, but those are the main two things that we see there. So unions failed to recognize that any entity must assess and adapt, and the failure to do so can have catastrophic consequences for your future. In particular, one thing that the unions should have done is to follow the same kind of assessment and adaptation that organizations have had to follow in order to keep and maintain their level of productivity and profitability. So there's really 5 areas that an organization and a union should look at to ensure that what they offer, whether it's a product or service, in terms of a union, its membership, whether what they offer is still needed and required even by its customer, by its users. First thing is that they have to understand what the current current needs and wants are of its members. This is very much about doing an assessment to find out what do our members want and need, because sometimes it's different. They may want something, but they may absolutely need something else. So that's one thing that the first thing you need to look at. Then 2, 3, and 4 are very similar except for a word or two. So 2 is the forecast and the impact of economic trends. From a union perspective, just like an organizational viewpoint, they should be looking at things like gross domestic product, inflation, standard of living, cost of living increases. They should look at the general economy and find out where that union, if it's an industry, where that industry fits within those equations. So you definitely have to continue to look at that. 3 is where you forecast the impact, the political trends. Over the last 16 of the last 24 years have been a Democratic president. They are much more favorable to unions. And that's going to continue to make a difference when you look at legislation, regulation, and support of the political entities. As we all know, the politics rules our world. And so you need to make aware of the Democrat and Republican, liberal, conservative viewpoints and how they're going to impact. 4 is the forecasts and the impact of technological changes. This is probably the most decimating to unions. And you look at things like computerization, robots, telecommunications, globalizations. All these factors have affected basic industries that were unionized, from manufacturing to production. Many of those have moved overseas. But those have to be predicted as best you can. The better you can predict the future, the better you're able to be aware and make the necessary, as we say, adaptations. And last is consumer demands and expectations. So this isn't of your members, of union members, but the industries that they work. Just like the industries and the organizations assess what their computers want or what their customers want, also unions should address that as well. They should do as much research on the customer base and their expectations of the industries they represent as the organizations themselves. So assessing the above may not have prevented the decline of the unions, but it would have allowed them to adjust to a new future, possibly by transferring resources from some markets and moving them into the other, and then also preparing its members to a different reality. It's a great lesson in how those who are most likely to profit from the future are those who are more able and best able to predict its eventuality. Always look forward to chatting with you guys. Have a great day. We'll talk again.